Hello and welcome to episode 5 of season 2 of the Pastor's Wives podcast. We are flying through this season and we're excited for today's episode. I got to sit down with Merrily Hagerman. Many of you may be familiar with her. She has spoken many times at our Pastor's Wives retreats. Her and her husband Gerald lead our Calvary Bible Institute all over the world. And she has been a pastor's wife for a lot of years and she has lived many different experiences as a pastor's wife, and she has so much wisdom to share with us. And so I'm excited for you to hear this conversation with Merrily Hagerman. Merrily, hi.
Hi. So good to be here.
It's great to have you. We would love for you to introduce yourself, to share a little bit about where you're ministering currently.
Okay.
And then we're going to kind of dive into where you've been in the past.
Right now, we are at Joshua Springs Calvary Chapel. We're in a kind of a transition time because just about 8 months ago, Gerald has gone ahead and turned the church over to a pastor about 40 years old and his wife, who are just real special to me, of course, because he's my son. So that makes it a little bit more special.
It does.
But, and we're in a different phase because now we're doing Calvary Bible Institute worldwide and here in the States. So we're busy quite a bit seeing what God's doing. Every phase of the Lord that he puts us in is a good phase. And, you know, each pasture that he leads us through is a good pasture. Mm-hmm. And it's not always the same one. Mm-hmm. And so we just have to be able to remain to be flexible on what the Lord wants to do with us now. Mm-hmm. And Gerald was just convinced that this was a time now to be able to go ahead and do CBI full-time. And so we're still at the church, but we're in a different capacity, and the church goes on. And it's been a very wonderful union to watch the church go on and springboard off to be successful, and many people coming to know Jesus. And then we're over here at CBI teaching and raising up the next generation.
That's amazing. And we're going to talk more about CBI, but before we move on, what does CBI stand for?
Calvary Bible Institute.
So
yes.
It is essentially a Bible college?
It is a Bible college. We take the students, they fill out applications, and then as long as they're in love with the Lord and we're secure about what that is, and after we've vetted them, we have a campus out at Joshua Springs out there by Yucca Valley, and we put the kids in there, and it's about a 10-month program because, you know, they get about 2 months off because of the holidays and this and that. And it's a ministry college. So we've been so blessed because every year we've been able to say we practically send these kids out to a different place to serve. Every single one of them goes somewhere else to serve. Wow. Calvary chapels have so many, 1,800 of us or whatever there is. Mm-hmm. And, you know, many times they need help. They need new worship leaders or they need youth pastors. Yeah. We have calls for the pastor that's maybe just become ill and he needs someone to be stepping in and coming alongside and starts as an assistant and then goes ahead and becomes the pastor. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of equipping the saints out there. So it's exciting.
It's amazing. I know for me, going to Bible college totally transformed my life.
Aww.
And it was a special time for me to just get away from everything and be grounded in the Lord as an adult.
It's so
like
good.
You're choosing your own direction as when you get to an adult. It's not just your parents. And so I think it's a great grounding for any teenager before they may go to college and do whatever they do to go to a Bible college or a CBI and get involved. So we'll talk a little bit about the end and how where they all are. But first I want to kind of dive in because you have had, like you said, many different seasons of ministry.
Yes.
You know what it is to serve the Lord in various places. Yes. You know what it is to serve the Lord in the deepest of heartaches.
Yes.
You know what it is to serve the Lord on the mission field.
Yes.
And so I want to kind of talk about all those things. So share a little bit about how you began in ministry and where that started for you.
Well, I was married before to a man that was in Twin Falls, Idaho, Brent Heather. And we were in ministry together, starting up there at Calvary Chapel. And we were up there 31 years, serving the Lord for that long. And then my husband got very ill, long story short. And so the Lord took him home. And so that was a navigating time. You know, my kids were 25 and 22. And so going through that and watching the pain of their dad and why this happened. And, you know, God took the pastor of the church. He was teaching at that time.
Yeah.
And so it was just a hard time, but yet the Lord's been very faithful. And so you fast forward about a year later, one of his good friends was Merrily Hagerman, who I didn't know. I had met once before, but I didn't know really who he was. He was down here in California, and I was up there in Idaho. But he came alongside and helped our church. My husband had talked with him about it as Brent was getting worse. He said, why don't you step up and help us? They had a large church, and so we were so blessed that they could step up and help our church in Idaho, which is a smaller church. And Gerald's wife had passed away of the exact same cancer that my husband had. Wow. It's called cholangiocarcinoma, and it's in the bile duct. And neither one were smokers or drinkers, but they both had the exact same cancer, and they went home 7 months apart from each other. Wow. So Gerald and I had a lot in common. So you fast forward a year ahead, and he proposed, and we got married.
Wow.
Now we've been married 16 years.
And it's been 16 years?
16 years,
and
yes, in November. I did.
To the desert.
I moved from Twin Falls to Yucca Valley, California, where the trees look like tortured souls, I like to say. And I'd never seen so much dirt in my life because it's mostly sand out there. And coming from Idaho, which is so plush and green and lots of water. But, the Lord assigns us where we're to be. And if we trust him, it's maybe not be exactly what you chose, but his plans are good. Yeah. And I've learned to appreciate the desert. I've learned to appreciate the dry heat. I've learned to appreciate sunsets, and just a lot. We don't have a lot of the insects that people, there's just a lot of beauty in things if you allow the Lord to have his work in your life. Mm-hmm. And so now some of my best friends I've met out there in 16 years. And had I never took that step to get out of what we were doing and where I lived, and I have to now live here and do this and continue in Twin Falls, Idaho the rest of my life, and I was willing to be open to what the Lord was leading me into, I've been very blessed.
Well, I love how you said that Joshua Springs was a larger church and Idaho was a smaller church.
Yes.
And how they helped one another.
They did.
And I think that's one of the most amazing things about the Calvary Chapel movement is that we get to help one another.
Yes.
And the larger churches are a great resource for some of the smaller churches. And but for you as a pastor's wife, ministering in a smaller church, ministering in a much larger church,
yes.
Did you find that your role looked different? Did you
of course.
find a lot of commonalities? What are some of the differences?
Well, when you're a pastor's wife in Idaho versus one in Southern California, I didn't know anyone in Joshua Tree and Yucca Valley area. I didn't know one person. And so for me, of course, coming from a very well-known, tight community, and I've been ministering up there 31 years with my husband.
So everyone knows everyone?
Everyone knows, and it was a smaller, the Twin Falls is about 60, 70,000 people. And so I was, I had a job at the hospital. I worked there and had a career. So quitting that and just jumping into a place called Yucca Valley, California, yes, it was different. Right. And I remember the people when I got there, they weren't sure they liked me, because the pastor's wife had passed away, the church was hurting. So odd, and then I wasn't sure I liked them. So it came to that part where I had to learn a lot, But through it all, I put my trust in the Lord, and it just some adjusting. And I still go home to Idaho to this day and see my friends and family, and will always probably be home. Yeah. Although I was raised in Whittier and went to Life Bible College where Chuck Smith went.
Oh,
yeah, it was kind of exciting. Yes, I did. Oh, wow. So that was a fun time in my life. But then when I married, I was married in Idaho until I came back.
Right. So now you said when you were in Idaho, you worked a full-time job?
I did. Full-time
job. Did you also serve in the church? Did you?
Yes, I did.
Women's ministry?
I did the women's
ministry. All the things. What did your your ministry look like? Because I know many of our pastors' wives, they have to work. They work as well.
I did. Mm-hmm.
They like to work.
Yep.
And so how did you juggle those things?
It was hard. I look back now, and Gerald and I will laugh, and we would say in our 40s and 50s, we seemed older than we do in our 60s. Because there's so much responsibility and so many moving parts and very, very rare days where you just can really just relax being who you are and having that time. Along with that, when I was raising teenagers with the church and working full-time with the church, my mother had Alzheimer's, so I was being a caregiver to my mom. And, it's just, like I said, I look back now and 51 seemed very old. because it was just so much responsibility. Ministry, you can't find a more rewarding life than to serve the Lord full time. And I will also say you can't find a more busy life, a more hectic life, a more life with pressure, because, when you're a pastor's wife, you're on. Whether you're at Target or whether you're on the soccer field or what, you're always on, and there's that constant pressure. And so, it was definitely a trying time in our lives, but God was faithful. The church was booming in Idaho. We started at Twin Falls, Idaho, and then we finally got the brand new building, and we loved it. And then my husband looked over, and we were with my brother at that time. And my husband looked over, and he said, "I think it's time we go start another church." And I was like, no, please. I waited a long time to have this beautiful building, 23, 24 years, and now you want to go somewhere else.
Wow.
And we went somewhere else. We went down the road, probably another 30 miles in Idaho, and started out in this little town called Buell, Idaho. And we started Calvary Chapel, Buell, Idaho.
Oh, wow.
And when we went there, it was it's about, I want to say 5,000-6,000 people. It's a small town, and Twin Falls has more like 60 or 70,000. And my husband was so cute. He goes, "I just want a tenth of the town." And you know what? Before he passed away, we had a tenth of the town coming to our church there in that little town in Buell, Idaho.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you know what it is to plant a church?
Plant a church, 2 churches.
Two churches.
Yes.
And you planted the one in Idaho Falls?
Yes.
Wow.
No, not Idaho Falls.
Oh.
Twin Falls.
Twin Falls.
Twin Falls, yeah.
That's a different
There's lots of falls up there. There's lots of water in Idaho.
So, Calvary Chapel has always been a church planting movement.
Yes.
I remember when my husband, he was on staff at Calvary Costa Mesa, Pastor Chuck Smith was alive, and he talked to Pastor Chuck about planting a church, and nothing excited him more. He just lit up at the thought of a new work beginning.
Yes.
And so I know many young pastors' wives, they've gone out and planted churches. What would be some advice that you would give them? A lot of them are younger, little kids. I know you just taught a workshop on marriage and family.
I did.
Yes. What would you say to the pastor's wife who's thick of church planting, wearing all the hats, got the little kids?
Yes.
What would be some advice?
It's a lot. I think you just have to really know that old saying, bloom where you're planted. You can't make a California church an Idaho church. You have to let go of everything you've learned here, because now God's called you someplace else.
Yeah.
And so you get accustomed to who the people are. Just because it worked in Southern California or it worked in Idaho and now you're in Rhode Island doesn't mean that it's going to work both places.
Right. You have to consider.
You have to consider, and you go to a different culture, and many of these different cultures have different religions in there too. Right. And you have different weather. Here down in California, we've been blessed, and it's pretty temperate year round, except for it's hot today.
Yeah.
But it's temperate. But maybe you're gonna move to someplace like Idaho or Wyoming. We just sent out some people from our church, a real young couple. She's pregnant and they got a 2-year-old, and they're starting the first Sheraton church in Wyoming.
Amazing.
And so proud of them. Yeah.
Amazing. So now
Montana.
Montana.
Sheraton, Montana. Yeah.
Montana, not Wyoming.
Yeah.
They're the same place to me.
Yeah. They're all up there together.
I've never been there. Have you been up there?
It's beautiful.
Before?
Yes, it's absolutely beautiful. But it snows. There's a Mormon influence once you get near Idaho, Utah, Montana, Wyoming.
Right.
There's just different and so maybe what I'm trying to say is maybe like down here you're used to having Sunday morning. We have a Sunday night. We have 2 services on Wednesday. But in a different town, such as someplace in Montana, maybe they don't go out much at night.
Right.
It's cold. There's ice on the roads.
Yes.
So then all of a sudden you find yourself going, well, we don't have to have a Sunday night service because no one's going to come out because it's freezing cold. And you just have to adapt instead of try to make it what you're used to.
Right. I that's great advice, because sometimes we try to do the method that we think
it doesn't
is the way to go.
And it doesn't.
And there are things that we keep the main thing.
Yes.
Like we don't compromise.
The Bible teaching and
the word and
and
faithfully serving in that way. But sometimes the methods that we use
and it's just a different area. Yeah. And you do have to adapt. And that's what Jesus was adaptable. He went to every situation, and wherever he went, he ministered.
Yeah.
But, different people in different, states, they're going to call for a different measure of what you've maybe been used to. So that's important as you're planting a church and getting to know the people. And it's just because what Calvaries don't realize, especially in Southern California, just because you put a sign out in Sheraton, Montana or Wyoming doesn't mean people are going to come. Just because it says Calvary Chapel, because when you get away from the hub of Southern California and the more well-known and maybe even Florida, and you go out to the places that there is not a Calvary anywhere, they don't even know who you are.
No.
They don't even have an idea what you teach. They don't just automatically come. We're in Southern California, pretty much, it's a Calvary,
Right. It has a
up
reputation.
There, these different states, they don't know who you are.
Yeah.
So it's winning them over and inviting them to church and giving them the Word of God, because that's what's going to change them.
Yeah.
And
that was so true of England too. I remember when Calvary, my dad planted the first Calvary Chapel in Wales, and Calvary Chapel was totally an unknown thing.
Yes.
So it had no history there, no reputation yet to be a solid Bible teaching church. And so it takes time, and we're just now seeing 20 years later just fruit starting to compound.
Yes.
And so it takes time. And I think
does
sometimes
take time.
We're in such a, instant gratification world that we think we're going to go serve the Lord.
Yes.
And, boom, all this is going to happen. And sometimes it's a slow and steady pace of sowing the seeds and plowing the ground. And
I think for a pastor's wife too, we need to see our husband's vision the way he sees it. I just got done teaching this workshop, and part of that was leaning into your husband's vision, what that is, instead of pulling the other way. Like, I would never leave Southern California. I would never leave my mother. I would never, my friends are here. I'm not going to go move in the cold. And you know what? I think that we rob ourselves of the blessing of God when we're not flexible and willing to go where God's laid on. So I said that, we might write that in our card to our husband. I'm willing to go wherever you want to go. Yeah. But are you? Yeah. Are you really willing? So I think that's where the fruit is. And many times that's where the blessings are, is to go when God calls you to go.
And it's so true. I think of my sister-in-law and brother-in-law. They just moved from California to Idaho.
Did, and she had to adapt.
And she had the family, everything.
Bless
she
her
knew.
heart.
But the Lord made it so clear. And, they were obedient even though they were sad.
Yes.
And the Lord is blessing it. And
it's
so
amazing.
Sometimes you do have to step outside of what's comfortable.
You do. And God meets you there.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yes. And the blessings are there. It's just sometimes it's just hard when we get in these, I don't want to call them a rut, but we just get too comfortable.
Yeah, we get too comfortable.
And I felt that in Idaho. When I had to move from Idaho down to Yucca Valley, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, this is a big step at 51 years old to have to leave everything and everyone in my position. And then to come down to this. But you know what? God, if you trust Him, will not let you make a mistake. And I think the more that you can tuck that before the Lord and just ask Him, Lord, please don't let me make a mistake. He honors that kind of a heart. And so He'll guide us. And, it's so exciting when to be able to watch your brother, your sister, and your brother-in-law be able to go do that and see the blessing of God on them for doing it. Probably from the very beginning when they started out. God's just been blessing them.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit, because I know you've done a lot of work on the mission field. And sometimes when you're in your own church and you're in your own ministry and you kind of get, what are they called? Fish eyes? What are they? What's the phrase? And you kind of just focused, like you're in a fishbowl, and you forget the way that the Lord is working around the world. And I think it's so important for every church to reach out and to be involved somehow in what the Lord is doing around the world. So can you share some of the missions efforts that you guys have been a part of and what's happening around the world?
Well, CBI is the main thing that we're doing right now from Joshua Springs. And it's so exciting to go to these different countries and to be able to set up these different Bible colleges, just like ours is here. I think right now we have 60-something students. We have a live-in campus there in Joshua Tree. And last year we had 75 people or 75 pastors come in and pour into these kids that want to be in the ministry. And to see the fruit of that, and then to see them go, different places. And we have, I think, a total of 17 overseas right now. The recent ones that we've just put on board were the Philippines, Brazil, Japan, and Mexico came on board with us also. Wow. And then there's just tons of them everywhere else. So it's like so exciting to watch what God's doing. But it is important to go out. Jesus said, go forth and preach the gospel, and go into all the world. And it's good to go because the Lord's busy and Jesus is coming. Hallelujah. Jesus is coming. Sooner the better.
Yes. Amen. That's awesome. That is so amazing. How many countries? 17, did you say
17 different countries.
Different countries. There is a CBI that you
There's a CBI that's Calvary Bible Institute. And, many of these kids that are that when they graduate from us, and we have a big graduation party and we have different people come out, all the speakers come out and talk, and they graduate in robes. And I mean, they have a certificate saying they completed this. But a lot of them go overseas. They're going, I want to go serve in Japan, or I want to, and we have the avenues to be able to open those doors to help them go. And right now we're in the process within 2 years of starting one in Germany. And we have a German student right now that's there in our Bible college, and he's learning all the ropes. So he'll probably be a real big part of starting the Calvary Chapel CBI in Germany, because he's now there and he's 22. And so by the time we get there, he'll be 24, 25. The pastor of the church can't wait to have it. And you can just see God's hand coming alongside all these different countries that need it so desperately.
Amazing. The work of God in Calvary Chapel throughout the world today.
Yeah.
For so many years. That's amazing. So Merrily, when I heard your testimony, and I remembered you sharing, so many different seasons in your life where you have experienced deep heartache, where you've experienced grief, the loss of a husband, and you've recently just walked through a very difficult season.
Very difficult.
Can you share with us what happened with your husband?
He was doing well. We had just left Rob Reese's church. We had the pastor's conference down there, and we're coming home on Tuesday night, and he seemed fine. Wednesday, he was filling in for a service at 4 o'clock. We have a 4 o'clock and a 6:30 service on Wednesday nights, and he was going to take the 4 o'clock service. And he walked in, and he said, the strangest thing happened. He said, I kept dropping my Bible. And he goes, as I'm walking out to my car, I dropped my Bible 3 times. And that's just silly, Yeah. And then I thought maybe he's dehydrated because, we're hot out there. So I'm feeding, giving him cold water, and we're talking. He goes, my arm feels numb. And I just knew that had not be a good sign. It's like, so I just kind of gently let's go get in the car and let's take you down to the hospital. And we took him down to Palm Desert, where's Eisenhower, which is a very good hospital. And it's about 40 minutes away from our house. But by the time the next morning rolled down, they had found out he had a brain bleed. And then, so they operated on him, and it came through fine. And we were all rejoicing. And, he sent a little text out to the church where he was talking, saying, I'm over, I'm better. And, now I'm holier than you. And he was laughing because he had a hole in his head. Yeah. And then within 12 hours, he was fighting for his life. It sprung loose again. And then they had to reoperate. And while they're reoperating, trying to get the bleed again, the back by the cerebellum started bleeding, which is all of their movements. And it's very serious. And so when they brought him back out, they just said, we don't know what you have. We won't know until we see how he wakes up, when he wakes up. But, and watching your husband go through a surgery and have a do not resuscitate on his arm was a lot for me, just knowing that this could just not turn out well. Mm-hmm. But you know what? You fall back on the things that you do know. And the things I did know was when Brent passed away, God saw me through 16 more years, and he's been faithful. And he's God's Gerald. He's not Merrily's Gerald. He's mine now, but he's really God's. And I had to just come to that fact, Lord, if you do take him, I will live. I will survive. I will trust you. I will not run away. I will still love you no matter what you do. But sometimes in your life, Ruth, you can become jaded in your heart and you don't even know you have a problem. And I see that more and more as people walk with the Lord. Some things happen to them along the way to where they became a bit jaded. And when Brent went home to be with the Lord, everyone was praying, and everyone had been praying for Gerald, but I didn't see that miracle. And so I think my heart got a little bit hardened because I thought, and then different people would come up and say, pray for my husband or my wife. She's had cancer. And in my mind, when I wasn't even conscious of it, there was she's going to die, because that's how I lived. That's what I saw. And the Lord knew that. And in Psalms 138:8, it says, he will perfect that which concerns me. I thought it was okay. And we don't know, sometimes we're not okay. And I was a bit jaded in my heart. And the Lord took me through this, I believe, and took Gerald, because we both watched our spouses die, wonderful Christians die, and then took us through this valley, and he healed them. And he let me see a miracle because I didn't get to see it before. Yeah. And I watched a man that could hardly walk over a curb and had a walker. I watched a man that was, when he was in the hospital, couldn't look at light and his head was wrapped. He's out now. He's full mind. He's full body. He's he gets up at 7 a.m, goes till 11 o'clock at night. It's all I can do to get him to take a nap. And he's so on fire for the Lord. He just is biding his time to get back in that plane and go on the mission field. So I've got to just die to myself with my fears and go, he's God's Gerald, and God's going to take care of him.
And God was not done with him, and so he has.
You can't go before your time. No. But I didn't see that at the time, and I didn't even know. I didn't even know I had a problem. Yeah. But God did. He's like, she's jaded. She doesn't think I could do this. Yeah. And then to watch it happen, oh my goodness, I was so excited. I'm still excited. Yeah. I still can't believe when he's standing there in the hallway and he's walking towards me that he doesn't need a walker or a cane. Yeah. He doesn't even walk with a cane. Yeah. You know, and 3 brain bleeds. I'm sure people are listening to this that know a little bit more about that than I do. He had hurt his head when he was in Uganda. He ran into a window that was open, and it actually dented his head to the bone. He has a dent in his head. And he would come home and he'd say, look at this dent. Isn't this funny? And we'd laugh, you know. Well, he bumped it again a year later, and that's what started the bleed. And it started the whole process. So to be able to see that and to see him is such a blessing. So I'm here to say miracles happen every day now.
Yes, they do.
They do.
And I love that you said that about, having a jaded heart, because I feel like that was the thing the Lord put on my heart for this retreat. It was what I shared on in the workshop I just did on the inner life of the heart. Yes. And we opened with, Lauren exhorting us to give the Lord our whole hearts. Yes. And I love how you said you didn't even know that I had a problem. That, because we talked about the Psalm where David says, search me and know my heart.
I know.
And because we don't know the condition of our own hearts.
We don't.
We need God to search them. And it's in situations and trials, and they come and we realize, oh, I didn't realize that was there.
And it's his way of the trials are for us. Yeah. They're never for him.
Right.
And that's hard to deal with also, to know that the trial is for me because he's perfecting me. And then once we get perfected, he takes us home. Yeah. But the trials are the chipping, and they're the molding, and they're the sifting that we need in our lives to make us more like him. Yeah. So,
And so, Merrily, as we bring it into a close, we always like to end on some kind of encouragement. What would you share or encourage the pastors' wives in, that might be listening in that particular area of ministry? Is there a favorite verse you have or a word of encouragement?
Sometimes you're going to face something that the future doesn't look clear, and it doesn't look like it even makes sense. But I'm going to encourage you to just keep trusting the Lord. Keep praying. When you're tired of praying, keep praying more, and not to give up, because he will see you through the darkest times. And no matter what that looks like, and there's people out there right now that are probably listening, and their times have been even darker than mine. Do you know what I mean? But when we surrender to him, he knows what's best for us, and he will work all things, like he says, with purpose for good for us. If we put him first and trust him. So that's my encouragement. Stay in there.
Yes. Amen. Thank you so much, Merrily. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for being with us for another episode of our podcast. We will be back next time with another special guest to share some encouragement for you ladies in the ministry. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. God bless.